welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. I'm Alice, host of House of ZK Radio. I'm joined here today with co-host Pavel from House of ZK, and our guests. We have two Lukases here, Lukas H., who is CEO at TACEO, and Lukas G., who is CPO at TACEO. So thank you so much, both of you, for joining here today. This is one of our first episodes at House of ZK Radio, where we have a team who also is specializing in MPC. So very excited for this.
Thanks for having us. Hi.
Thanks, Alice, for bringing us on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if we can first start off with an introduction of yourselves and hear a bit more about your background and what led both of you. I believe you two were part of the same university research group. What led you and your team to transition from academia to focusing more on the industry?
You're right, like most of the team is from a research group originally, and for the most of the time of the last couple of years, we did spend our research on CK and MPC. So one of like the more notable outcomes of like the research back then was the Poseidon hash function, which is now like used widely in the industry. And what brought us to like really going more into the industry and really founding TACEO was a work that we did during the beginning of the COVID crisis, where the Austrian government asked us if we could look into how to combine mobility data with infectious disease data and how to combine them in a privacy-preserving way. So we designed a privacy-preserving protocol, really leveraging everything we knew about MPC, CK, and FHE. And this kind of like gave us an outlook that the technology is ready for large-scale use cases, in this case of millions and millions of citizens. Unfortunately, in the end, like the only outcome was like a pretty nice paper that we could present at a conference. But following like with such a protocol into production really needs a different setup than an organization, like a research lab. And this bothered us because like we saw that like the technology we were kind of cheering on for years would have an impact in real world, but we couldn't really follow on because like we were not set up in the right way. And that's what we started to change from them.
Yeah, I'm probably the least cryptographer and researcher on the team, but my journey started in the crypto space already more than 10 years ago when I stumbled upon Bitcoin. I was immediately hooked by Bitcoin itself, but also by the underlying technology. And during the last 10 years, I built several ventures in the crypto space and faced over and over again the same issue, namely, how can we actually deal with some private or confidential or encrypted data on-chain? So when I was running my DeFi protocol back then, we built automated investment strategies and realized we can't really put more sophisticated strategies directly in a smart contract because our competitors would see that as well. Some art bots would see how we intend to execute our strategies, and all this head start we imagined to have would just begun. When I got married in 2018, me and my wife decided to create a wedding contract, and I thought it would be a great idea to put this on a blockchain. So we created one of the world's first smart wedding contracts, as we called it back then. And again, we had this issue: all of our assets in this smart contract would be public to anyone. So if we, buy a house, right, and we at some point in time we can tokenize this asset, everyone would see how this would be distributed. So again, I faced this issue: why can't we actually put encrypted data on chain? And yeah, it took me a couple of years to realize that privacy enhancing technologies, namely CK and now MPC, are kind of the solution to this problem. And so I was super grateful to meet then my other co-founders, which just came out of university and wanted to work on the same problem. And so our journey began.
Yeah, great. And it's really great to hear kind of the differences between your backgrounds, but how you guys were able to merge together based on that shared vision. So from Lukas H, you were working in academia, and during the time of COVID, you mentioned that you were assigned a project to see how you can combine mobility with infectious data in a privacy-preserving way, and that you realized that smaller use case can actually be applied more at scale in terms of privacy-preserving applications. And then for Lukas G, I liked your story about the wedding smart contract and how that led you to think about how we can put this encrypted data on chain in a more private way. So great to hear where those two visions of yours combined.
Yeah,
and
I think there's often like the saying, there's technology push or market pull, and I think in our case it's actually what's reflected there. So the guys working really on the core technology and realize this technology can evolve and can be put in production. And I witnessed this over and over again from a kind of market and demand side, that we need a solution for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just on the topic for privacy preserving tech, I'm curious to hear about any trends that both of you have seen in regards to programmable privacy and its tools over the years, and its needs today with how data is being handled today. So I think from the TACEO side, you guys are very keen on looking at the AI development trends, data privacy regulations, and then also the number of breaches that are happening. So curious to hear about the developments that you see with programmable privacy on the tech side, but then also how its needs have evolved to today with all of these things like with AI, with data privacy being considered.
So I think like for the couple of years, like at least 10 years, like on theory, everybody was agreeing that privacy enhancing technology is really good. Like if you look at the GDPR, which was drafted roughly in 2016 and like became into force in 2018, like they have great section about like even making the state of the art in privacy enhancing technology mandatory to use. But what is the state of the art of technology? Like this is where like things become a bit fuzzy, and which I think like most of the cryptographers in academia have worked a lot in the last couple of years to make the performance, like that's mostly academia cares about performance, not so much about developer experience, but at least the performance suitable that you can like really claim that this is state of the art. Now, this took some time, and of course like performance is not the only thing you need for becoming state of the art, but I feel like we are now at a point where things could accelerate really fast. Seeing, for example, the European identity solution, where in a wallet they really push for that CK is used as a primitive to make like selective disclosure. Like seeing this on like these legal frameworks really be pushed forward, I think, yeah, kind of tells the amount of work that from all sides are put there, and getting like really a pressure that this is not an option but mandatory in the future.
And I still think that users still don't care about privacy. I think that was true 20 years ago and is still true today. So if you ask someone, hey, do you want to have a private solution? Unfortunately, most of users would opt in for a more user-friendly and free and easy to use solution. But I still think people care about the effects privacy has. So if they interact on-chain and they get a worse price when they do a trade because someone saw my trade intent and front-run me and I ended up in having a worse price, there I actually do care about privacy. And so people probably won't call it privacy, but now I think we see more and more use cases where people realize, okay, in order to get to my desired outcome, I need some form of privacy or privacy-preserving technology.
Definitely. And especially what you said, Lukas, about users still not caring about privacy and always choosing, I suppose, the more convenient option as opposed to privacy. If we develop some sort of privacy preserving integrated solution that requires users to undergo more checks or more steps, impacting their user experience, it's more likely that we won't see as greater adoption. So yeah, great to hear that from both of your guys' side. And I wanted to ask how this ties into TACEO's vision of enabling private shared state and kind of like the current status quo of how we currently interact with our data both on and off chain, and how right now there's really no spectrum between having data that is fully public, like say fully public on-chain data, and also fully private data, and how private shared state can enable for this spectrum and multiple possibilities.
So I think the reason why blockchains are all public is probably not a feature, it's maybe more a bug. And it's needed somehow in order to get the properties blockchains bring. Like I want to have integrity, I want to have transparency in order that I can re-execute transactions and stuff like this. So I think it was just harder from the get-go to start with a more privacy-preserving solution. With now ZK applications being deployed, I think that's one first great step towards the right direction, so that we can handle some form of confidential data on-chain. Still, what we see is that this data mostly is kind of client-side or single user, as we call it. So if I have private data and use ZK, I still own the private data and just put some commitment and approve on-chain. And it's hard for other parties to interact with this commitment or with this proof, and to kind of what I can't do today is to compute on multiple private inputs. So to really have such a multiplayer use case in a privacy preserving way is super hard to get. And that's what we want to achieve with private shared state, so that we can collect private inputs from multiple sources, compute on them, execute any arbitrary function, and output a state update to, for example, to a public blockchain based on these inputs. And I think that's a primitive which doesn't really exist as of today, and as we think this could enable a lot of new use cases.
Absolutely, and it's also great that you mentioned that although we are making some improvements, like say integrating with ZK still has its own limitations, especially since, say, after a proof is generated, it's hard for other parties to interact with it, and with just ZK only, computing on multiple private inputs is not possible. But with private shared state, we can actually make this possible. And curious to hear also about any kinds of particular applications or use cases that you both are really keen about for private shared state, whether it be privacy enhanced ML or even like any sort of collaborative data applications. So wanted to hear about any kinds of particular use cases that you both are thinking about when it comes to using private shared state.
We're going on first, Lukas?
Yeah, so like my research mind also always wonders like at the next possible step, what we can do with this technology. And one thing that I'm really excited about is like the application of collaborative SNARKs to AI. And one very like neat use case here is if you think like that, like it won't take long that we have personal agents like doing a lot of jobs for us in like our professional life or like in our personal life. So one of the simplest example would be like an agent that has access to our calendars. And like if we want to go on a podcast, we do not do this like messages back and forth, but our agents kind of have knowledge about our calendar and our context, maybe our preference to do, in which day of the time we feel very energetic about going on a podcast, and they kind of in the background arrange a time slot. Now the problem is I don't want my agent to share all the information with your agent, because ultimately you have maybe control of your agent and you would like see all the context, the calendar, and whatever preferences I have stored. And so we would have to do like a collaborative agent in some form. And this needs MPC. And of course, we wanted also to make it verifiable so that we can really see that the agents only do the steps that we ask them to do. And so this would be like a very like futuristic form of collaborative SNARKs, where our agents compute something together without revealing the underlying data. And this could go also in our personal life. For example, if we want to arrange dinner with family, everybody has the preferences for like what they want to eat and so on and when, and like they could just in the background arrange this without ever having access to these raw data that are probably very sensitive.
And another area I'm quite excited about are stablecoin payments, but in a not in a public sense, but in a private, confidential way. I hear people often say that stablecoins are the kind of first kill application for crypto, and I think I would agree to some extent, but still I don't see a world where all our stablecoin payments are just done in public. I mean, certain areas it's probably totally fine to do that, but just thinking about getting paid my salary in publicly, and once you know my wallet, you can trace back my kind of income over the last 3 years. That's probably something I don't want to see. So we need some form of confidentiality in there, but on the other hand, still act in a compliant environment, right? So we've seen the other end of the spectrum where everything is shielded and confidential when it comes to token payments or confidential token transfers. And yeah, this opens up the door for money laundering and things we don't want to see on blockchains. So there is some middle ground, and I think especially coSNARKs and private chat state is, in our opinion, a great solution to tackle this middle ground, enable private stablecoin payments, but still be compliant and act according to regulations.
I like the point that you're mentioning. Essentially, you're offering the flexibility of revealing certain aspects of information and then essentially extending that to different scenarios, whether that be the bookings on appointment settings with the agents or the stablecoin payments. Very, very interesting to see the approaches there. I guess like when this solution when you're talking about the flexibility that it provides, is it primarily just on the privacy preserving nature of like selectively revealing information, or is there, I guess, other aspects to this? Like, can you do more than just the selectively revealing aspect?
I think like not only selectively revealing, but like also you can define the functions that you like. It's programmable. So in that sense, like you can ask questions about the data with like a function, with a program, not only like, okay, so I selectively reveal my age or something like this, but like really only on the need to know basis, like with like this data minimalism where like if a regulator comes in, they can ask their question very precisely, in the best case with an algorithm, and only this algorithm and the result is transferred to them, and this should handle the matter like if whatever they asked about. Because currently it's most likely people go in with a warrant or whatever, and then you disclose everything, or like at least everything from these 2-3 columns or whatever, which is not needed most of the time because the answer, the question that they're looking for is more specific.
And making it programmable, you mentioned that you can even ask questions about the data. It's not just about the selective disclosure, like
exactly.
Choosing which types of information to share. Oh, okay. That sounds that sounds great. I feel like right now we honestly don't have that flexibility in trying to figure out or trying to do any sort of further data analysis, especially if we want to keep that data private or if we want to collaborate with someone else. So very great to hear kind of this entire spectrum of possibilities that can be enabled. And on the coSNARKs side, in terms of the implementation or the integration with combining MPC and ZK, I'm curious to hear what that looks like on the TACEO teams. And are there any types of ZK proof systems that are particularly MPC friendly, or any types of MPC protocols that are particularly suitable for ZK? What was kind of the process in trying to integrate both ZK and MPC on the TACEO side?
Maybe on a high level, to answer the question why we actually tackle MPC and ZK in both. So what we realized is when we want to run MPC computations, we need to do that off-chain, and we want that the output of the computation triggers some state update on some host chain, like some layer 1 or layer 2, whatever. When we just run vanilla plain MPC, essentially the chain we integrate with needs to trust the entire MPC set. So if you now have a super decentralized network like Ethereum, and then you have a few party MPC protocol, your entire trust assumption would boil down to these 3, 4, 5 nodes, which is obviously not a good solution. So what we want to have is certain verifiability in the computations the MPC is doing. So that means we are adding ZK to the stack, which means every computation the MPC performs outputs not just the desired output, but also a SNARK, which then can be verified on-chain. And only upon successful verification on-chain, the state update is triggered. So we can be sure that the entire coSNARK network is acting compute is that there's computational integrity, and the trust assumption is only, quote unquote only, of course, for the privacy reason.
Yeah, maybe like to give like an intuition like how this work on MPC and ZK unfolded and which proof systems you want to combine with which MPC protocols. Like when we figured out this problem, nobody has built anything in coSNARKs. Back then there was basically 1 or 2 papers about collaborative SNARKs, like this original one from Dan Bonnet and Alex in 2022. And it showed a clear path. Let me start, like, the question is like, why didn't, like, as Lukas described, this high level explanation, this sounds very reasonable. So why are we the first one like really doing this? And it's because like it's such a new thing that in academia people combined MPC and ZK in such an efficient way. So this paper was, in hindsight, it's like very easy how they combine MPC and ZK and very obvious. But before that, like you would expect you have MPC like adding an overhead, essentially encrypted compute, adding a lot of overhead. And ZK we also noted adding quite some overhead. If you combine 2 complex technologies, usually like they blow up, like they like multiply with each other, and you're nowhere near practical. So this paper back then, like now 3 years ago, showed this, how to do this with little overhead to a ZK computation. So now suddenly it was in reach of becoming practical. And once we realized that, we really doubled down on collaborative SNARKs. And today the most performant protocols are with SNARKs. So there's like these 2 types of succinct, basically ZK proof systems, STARKs or SNARKs, and MPC protocols are usually doing way better with SNARKs. It boils down to which commitment scheme is used. Like in SNARKs, usually use an elliptic curve-based commitment scheme, which have a nice linearity, and all linear computations are very nice in MPC. Versus the STARKs having like a hash-based commitment schemes, which are highly nonlinear and which takes quite some rounds to compute.
Got it. So right now there is a way where MPC and ZK, despite both having its own overhead, there is a way for it to be combined where there's actually little overhead for it to be implementably speaking, feasible. And as you mentioned, Lucas, MPC protocols are kind of more favorable towards SNARK-based protocols, and especially because they have the elliptic curve-based commitment schemes versus the hash-based ones. Got it.
Just a also clarifying question, like the amount of participants within MPC, does that have a correlation with the performance, or like is there like a amount of participants where we can guarantee the information is essentially private and preserved while still maintaining that performance piece?
So like with every like network system, like it is secure under certain assumptions you make about the system. Like with in Ethereum, like we have like this 51%, we assume that behave honestly. And it's the same case in MPC protocols. Like you have a very different variety, like as with consensus protocols, you kind of have like very strong ones and very weak ones. Like usually you take something like a 50% threshold that like you can like corrupt up to 50% of the nodes, and that's like where the protocol still stays private. In our case, like the very good things like integrity can never be attacked. As the output of each computation is a SNARK that can be verified, even if all the parties like cheat, you would like detect it because the proof wouldn't verify.
Yeah, that's great to hear how there's kind of like multiple checks in that pipeline. And in terms of also just the logistical aspect of combining ZK and MPC with coSNARKs, are there any types of like particular computations that coSNARKs are only compatible with? I think in one of the papers that I read, it might have been the original Dan Benet one, there were some MPC protocols that had some limitations in terms of the types of computations that they could be supported with, like for example, only supporting circuit valuation and not RAM-based execution. And then also curious to hear if there's any sort of like MPC optimized implementations that can handle some computationally expensive operations that come with ZK, like the fast Fourier transform or MSM-based computation. Seems like a lot of proving-based systems have kind of like some bottlenecks in terms of those types of operations. But curious to hear about for both of those in terms of like the types of computations that these coSNARKs are compatible with, and how they are in terms of handling, say, some more known ZK computationally expensive operations as well.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the easier one. This is like the FFTs, MSMs, and like what usually takes the most bulk of like proof generation, the most cost, at least like in time. Fortunately, all these computations are linear, so we have really zero overhead when we're doing them in MPC, because each node can operate on their own signatures and do not have to communicate with the other nodes for this step. So that's essentially one of like the major reasons why coSNARKs are so fast, because they do not add any overhead compared to a SNARK in this most critical steps of FFTs and MSMs. So this was the main thing that the paper showed. For the type of computations that you can do, currently we support, as you mentioned, like circuits, like NOR circuits and circumcircuits. RAM-based programs are quite more tricky. Like this would essentially mean a whole virtual machine. And this was even like quite a challenge for CK for some time. We're now seeing like teams building great CK VMs. But there, the memory handling is much easier because the prover actually knows where the data lies. Like they are allowed to know the secret, the underlying data, so can access the memory easily. In our case, if you're building this on secret shared data in MPC and like you want to preserve the privacy of the data, you have to obliviously access those data, because otherwise, if you would know where the data is, you would learn a lot about like the computation and even the underlying data. And that's why you need something like that's called oblivious RAM, which is its own field of research, closely related to MPC, but like from a practical reason is quite challenging. We're working on some aspects of oblivious RAM because it's like needed for the next iteration of private shared state that we want to ship. But like having a general VM for coSNARKs is quite a challenge.
Got it. So there are certain operations like for the FFTs and MSMs. With MPC, there's actually not any extra overhead that comes from doing these operations. And compared to the VM approach, you mentioned that provers can access memory and are able to access those private inputs. So doing those RAM-based program execution is a lot easier. But I suppose the memory issue is kind of universal everywhere because there's still a lot of ZK VMs that are dealing with memory leaks. So it seems like that may be kind of a universal difficulty that everyone is experiencing. And in terms of just some more context for prior MPC efforts, I know that you both mentioned, like previously, there hasn't really been a way to combine ZK and MPC in a very efficient manner. But since the release of that paper, which suggested a way where there wasn't any extra overhead with those certain operations. But maybe Lukas G, on the product side, you can share some more insights from your perspective. I'm curious to hear of any types of like bootstrapping or even incentivization challenges that existed in these prior MPC developments, and how TACEO's approach really helps to address these.
I think the main difference compared to prior solutions and the approach we follow now is many teams try to build out their dedicated layer 1 or layer 2 solution and immediately compete it with all other ecosystems out there. So it's not just you need to get this entire cryptography part up and running, but also need to essentially launch a dedicated chain with all other aspects of it. You need to have users, you need to have wallet integrations, you need to find developers who build applications on top of your chain. I think that's super competitive and really hard to be successful in there with this already existing ecosystems. Our approach is different, so we don't compete really with any other public or even private blockchain out there. So our approach is that we extend those existing ecosystems. So if they are very good in handling public state and have a lot of liquidity, a lot of assets, a lot of users already on the chain, they can just integrate to our private shared state network and suddenly don't only have public state, but also be able to handle encrypted data via private shared state. And I think that makes much more sense, so that everyone can focus on the things they are very good in, and together we can offer a compelling solution.
Got it. And I really like how you mentioned that the intention from TACEO's side is to extend these existing ecosystems and figure out ways to integrate rather than just building completely new systems from the ground up, so that existing solutions, as you said, can focus on what they're good at. And if they want to have encrypted data on chain, they want to focus more on the privacy details, then they can just integrate with TACEO's private shared state network. So that's great to hear. And I also wanted to hear some more details in terms of how both on TACEO's end and also on the user's end, the approach that one should take for choosing the right MPC protocol in order to achieve any desired security guarantees. And then also on TACEO's end, what was the thinking or what was the approach in choosing which MPC protocols should be supported for proof generation.
Yeah, as you mentioned, like choosing the right MPC protocol is really hard, and the reason for it is that like academia has come up with a lot of different variations and flavors. Like there are at least like 3 dimensions on which you can evaluate like security and trust in an MPC protocol. And so it makes it really hard for non-cryptographers to assess real-world impacts. We want to abstract this in long-term away. Like you do not think about Ethereum security if you trade there. Like a lot of smart people have made up their mind and came to like a very reasonable assumption how to make this network secure, and like even quantifying it with like economic security, for example. But you do not have to like look at is this the best consensus algorithm that we can have, and so on. For us at TACEO, like choosing the right MPC protocol for like the existing stack, we very much focused on performance. We know that like customers, developers really need the performance to make their products and UX great. And so like most of the time we focus on the performance of the MPC protocols. And in this case, we defaulted to a protocol which is called replicated secret sharing, which has like extremely nice properties if you're going for speed, especially in the CK area.
Got it. So the main priorities that the team had were on performance. And yeah, it's very interesting to hear kind of the thinking in terms of the process that teams choose, especially since, as you mentioned, there's so many flavors and so many variations in academia, and there's a lot to choose from. And going into some more details about TACEO's proof network, I wanted to learn more about this because I think TACEO has one of the first private proof networks, and you're able to take the, I suppose, the benefits from both server-side proving, where one can outsource their proofs, but then also have the advantages of the privacy-preserving aspect within client-side proving. So I wanted to hear some details from both of you, the current challenges that are associated with those, I guess, those two ends with client and server-side proving, and with TACEO, how users are able to delegate private proof generation to a proof network with outsourcing their proofs, and what advantages that approach comes rather than just choosing purely client-side proof generation or, say, using some kind of existing proof marketplace.
So we launched TACEO Proof as the first version of our network. That's quite recently, actually. The main idea was we can use MPC and coSNARKs to speed up the proof generation for clients. And in this stage of the network, it's all about with a single client, a single user, which sends a request to an MPC network to generate a proof. And the output is then delivered on-chain or back to the user. This is a one-time ephemeral computation, and as said, it's single user. And from there, we want to take it and kind of evolve the network for multi-user input and also for persistent state. And this is then where we get into private shared state later. The reasoning why we start with proof generation for now is that we see a lot of CK protocols and CK chains which rely on client-side proving for privacy reasons. We think it's a great approach because it's the kind of maximum in terms of privacy you can get, but it sometimes really hurts the user experience. So especially if the users are not running on high-end hardware, proof generation time can take quite long. And as I said earlier, I think a lot of users are really cautious when it comes to some bad UX. And if I need to wait for proof to be generated on my phone for 10 seconds or even more, it's very likely that I think, okay, this is not a good application. I just churn and use some other stuff. That's one problem we see, that proving times can take quite long. The other one is that also when you need to ship your application, you usually also have to include proving keys, which can be quite large in size. So you would again ask a user to download an additional 500 megabyte, 1 gigabyte of data, which then can occupy some storage on user device. And to get rid of those two issues, we introduced the TACEO proof so that the user can outsource proof generation to the MPC network. It's also for the developer quite easy to integrate. It's just a simple API call to the network. The proof is generated. Depending on the circuit size, we see numbers going towards sub-seconds even, and can deliver back the generated proof to the user.
Yeah, that's very impressive that kind of that process can happen in sub-seconds, even though there's that, I suppose, like perceived like thought that MPC will add a bit of overhead, but really great to hear that in this case, it doesn't seem to be the case where there's any significant overhead to the point where the proof generation times can decrease. And it's great also how you're really thinking about the developer experience side. So in terms of like the integration, you mentioned that it's just a simple API call. So users are just able to integrate very seamlessly. And on that like client proof generation side, you mentioned some of the caveats there with how long it may take to generate the proof, especially if users don't have kind of the appropriate hardware. And then even in terms of like downloading the proving key, the size can be quite large. So yeah, great points that you mentioned there. I wanted to hear more about also the scalability that comes with MPC-based proof generation. I'm wondering if there's any potential cases of bottlenecks or kind of limitations that come with coordinating multiple parties to work on proof generation. And I think for a lot of teams who are designing proof marketplaces as well, one aspect that they're thinking about is how they can address collusion. And I'm curious to hear of how TACEO's proof network addresses the prevention of collusion from these multiple participants in the secret sharing aspect, especially since TACEO is building a decentralized market and the provers aren't really known in advance. So if there's any kinds of like incentive or selection models that the team is thinking about implementing to address any like potential malicious provers or those who intend to collude. And then on the other side, if there's any other like potential overhead in terms of like the coordination aspect for proof generation that the team is paying attention on. I'm curious about that scalability aspect as well.
Yeah, let me first address the scalability aspect. So the biggest bottleneck we see for proof generation is actually in a step before the proof generation. So this is called witness generation or extended witness generation. What this part does is essentially, and it exists like in a traditional CK as well, like it runs the program, executes the program once and prepares some values for the actual proving part. And usually like people do not give this part a lot of attention because it's much smaller than the actual computation, the actual proving generation. And it was also omitted, like for example, from the original collaborative SNARKs paper. But if you like care about the underlying data for private chat state, for example, or for private proof delegation, this becomes tricky as nobody is allowed to see the witness, so the private data that goes into the proof. Also, this first step has to be run in MPC. And in this program, in this witness witness generation program, this could be about anything. Like this is essentially like the circuit you want to prove, like the program you want to execute. So you need a general purpose way to have a fast MPC execution. So this is where most of our optimizing efforts these days lie. And you have to make like a lot of progress in MPC to make this work for like a large variety or like a large class of use cases. To the second part of your question, how do we think about collusion? So the collusion in ZK proving markets that you mentioned are mostly like concerned about the market mechanism function. So how does I prevent like collusion from market participants such that the price is really going down and like you have a competitive price? In our case, like for the integrity, we do not have any problem with collusion. As said earlier, like this is like sufficient from the property of the zero knowledge proof. Where we do care and want to like mitigate and prevent collusion is about like the privacy, so that the underlying data does not get revealed to the MPC nodes. And the short-term, like very easy solution to kind of make collusion much more harder and especially like more expensive is to let the coSNARKs node run in the TE. So like you put like the economic attack is like the value of the economic attack is like much higher. Like for medium and long term, we have a very like ambitious program to fund and do ourselves like interdisciplinary research with the focus on collusion mitigation, where we look at methods like watermarking, traitor tracing from cryptography, but also like game theoretic approaches, how to sample from a decentralized network, how to incentivize or mitigate collusion with economic modeling. And this like effort started a few months ago. We're teaching a course at the university, like at our alma mater, where we encourage students to look at this topic, and we also collaborate like with international experts on this.
Got it. And in terms of like the scalability piece, right now a lot of the optimization efforts are being made in terms of the witness generation part, and with addressing the economic model for the proof network, you're looking into experimenting with some different game theoretic approaches. So that all sounds really great, and hopefully maybe you guys in the future can come out with a paper specifically on TACEO's proof market. I know I'd be very interested in seeing kind of the decision making behind, say, choosing one particular approach or one particular selection or incentive model. So hopefully in the future we can see that. And I also wanted to ask some more questions about the developer tooling and your specific developer tooling ecosystem that TACEO has. So maybe from the product side, Lukas G, maybe you have some more insights on this as well, but wanted to hear about the motivation that was behind building tooling specifically with NOR and STRCOM in terms of its witness extension and also the proof generation for being inside an MPC environment, and how that affects the overall developer experience for those that are currently building with NOR and STRCOM. Are there any like particular additional steps that they need to take with using coNOR and coSTRCOM, and how does that like developer workflow look like for both?
So we started out with CIRCOM and our library coSTRCOM. Back then it was kind of an easy target for us. We saw that CIRCOM is quite widely distributed, and it was, let's say, easier for us to build tooling around CIRCOM back then. Now with more that NOR is getting more traction and kind of a larger community builds around it, we we are happy that we can tap into this community and offer a tooling also for NOR. It's a bit more challenging for us to build out the tooling compared to the Circum one, but still we see already now that people picking up the early version of the coNOR tooling and start building great demos and examples, and yeah, this is inspiring to us to understand what people are looking for, and also is a great feedback loop to our development pipeline. Using NOR, I think it's in general a much better developer experience down the line compared to Circum. So it definitely makes sense to double down on that and offer tooling for people which want to build private shared state application based on NOR. In terms of how easy it is to integrate, I would say it's quite straightforward. So if you start off by an already existing circuit, even if it's either a Circum or a NOR circuit, you can just plug it into our tooling. So you don't need to rewrite your circuits. You just take them, plug it into our tooling, and then make sure that you use the API to call the network for execution of the circuit. But that's also was important for us, that people don't have to reinvent or rebuild everything from scratch, but just take the existing one and are good to go.
Yeah, I just want to really highlight here the decision last year to double down on NOR and the community. It was very early stage, the community was much smaller, but since the first NORCon in Bangkok, the community really grew fast, and is at least we met at NORCon 2 in Berlin, and I think you could really saw this is the forefront of programmable privacy. This is where all the builders that wanna go the next step with programmable privacy are. And this is great that you see this common ground where each party rallies around, and where we can reuse this great community and the developer tuning and getting them MPC expertise or MPC program capabilities just for free if they already know NOR.
Yeah, got it. And really like that pluggable approach that the team has taken, and even what you say with tapping into those existing ecosystems and their involved builders, leveraging the network there. And in the tooling itself, not needing to rewrite these circuits from scratch or learning a completely new, say, language or approach, I think really helps to relieve the any kinds of burdens that come from integrating with a new type of tech, and then also just helping with the overall smoothing out the overall developer experience. So very great to hear from your guys' side how you are looking to integrate, and it seems like there really isn't, from the user's perspective, there really isn't too much of a big learning curve, or a lot of additional steps that they need to take with integrating with MPC, which is really great to hear.
And it was also intentionally from us to tap into a CK community, because CK is hard for a beginner, and MPC is also hard for a beginner. And if you face both technology for the first time, it's probably overwhelming. So if you're already quite comfortable with CK, we thought it's not that much of an effort to then also get your hands onto MPC and essentially extend your knowledge beyond CK and just add MPC on it. It's still not that easy, of course, but combining these two technologies.
Yeah, got it. And I was also curious to hear about any additional privacy preserving tools that you two have seen, and how MPC and ZK really compare to them. For example, I know, Lukas, you mentioned in terms of, say, running the proof generation part within a TEE. or even like outsourcing computations. For example, some people are looking into homomorphic encryption or fully homomorphic encryption. So I'm curious to hear like what specific advantages do you see MPC providing in this context as opposed to some of those other privacy preserving tools that a lot of different teams are looking at?
So I think like for TEs, like the obvious reason why you want to use them is speed, like the overhead of using a TE versus like the plain computation is like in a small percentage. So if you kind of do not like have verifiability through ZK, but through TEs, like you get it like a lot cheaper. And this is the same for like encrypted compute, where you replace essentially the MPC part with TEs. Although like our reasoning is that like relying solely on TEs for high value applications or like a decentralized network is like not good enough. Like there is like just the economic security model doesn't make sense in that case. And FAT for outsourcing zero knowledge proof generation is like generally not feasible, because the FFT part that you mentioned, like the heavy part of proving zero knowledge proof generations, do not come with this nice property in FAT that they had no overhead. Like we did like a small X course, and like the overhead was like 10,000 X for this. So you couldn't even run a full proof. What I'm generally quite excited about, what we haven't talked about, and which is like orthogonal to these technologies we mentioned, is differential privacy. Like usually in blockchain related context, we do not see it much, but like I'm very like excited about it when it comes to data analysis. Like this is the kind of cryptography method where you add a noise to the output of a computation, data analysis, or like an AI training, or even an inference. But like you have provable bounds how big the noise is, and like how far away the actual result from the result that you're getting is. And so I think like this is quite overlooked in the blockchain domain, but once like we're adding some more capabilities like data analytics and AI, it will like pick up as it does in Web 2.
Yeah, got it. Very interesting to hear about kind of its applications with differential privacy. And I know there's kind of like a lot of other teams who are also thinking about this, but in terms of implementation yet, we haven't seen too much as of yet. But it's really great that the TACEO team is really thinking about these other types of tools out there. And even experimenting with the FHE aspect, and how you saw that there was like a 10,000 times overhead. So really great to hear that you're experimenting with those different tools in the ecosystem and choosing which one you felt was the best for the current time and given what you wanted to do with the private shared state. And in terms of like upcoming or current integrations and collaborations, I'm aware that TACEO has a world collaboration coming up. So I'm curious to hear what the team hopes to achieve with that, and how MPC can be applied to World ID, and any additional upcoming integrations that the team is excited about or hopes to see.
Lukas, you want to go?
Yeah, so the partnership with World really like dates back 1.5 years roughly, and it started with working on the problem: how do you achieve uniqueness without knowing the data, and this even in a decentralized setting. So for reference, like one step in like getting a World ID is you scan your eyeball at an orb. So your iris gets scanned, and from this you create like what's called an iris hash, like basically a bit string. And now for uniqueness, you have to check it against the database if you like already registered or not. But you don't want to hold this database like centralized, because like you want to make this a protocol, not like a company. Now you could easily decentralize this on like a blockchain like Ethereum, but with doing that, you would like spread all these identifiers or like to all the validators. Like basically 800,000 validators would have now the iris codes. Like definitely not a behavior you want. So how do you achieve like confidentiality of the computation in a decentralized setting? And that's exactly like the description of the problem MPC solves. And so we work together with them to bring a protocol into production that achieves exactly these properties, like this decentralization, but like can like obviously like in an encrypted form query if you're already registered or not. And yeah, this is, as far as we know, the largest MPC use case today, and it's live, and it's like protecting the iris data of 14 million users now.
Got it, and really great to hear about kind of how scalable this application is, even for just this one integration alone, how it can apply to those 14 million users. So yeah, I think we're in a very exciting time for not just ZK and not just MPC, but for these privacy-preserving tools in general. And just as a last question before we close today's session, I'm wondering if you two have any announcements that you'd like to make on behalf of TACEO. And I also ask this to every one of our guests, but if you have any particular advice that you want to give to people in the audience watching, whether that be developers or there's some founders in our audience as well, and just like general users who are interested in looking at ZK, if you have any advice for them. So wanted to hear about announcements, but then also any like takeaways or advice.
Yeah, I would turn it around and can kind of invite people to start engaging with our tooling, with us. So join the Discord, start conversations with us. We're super interested in getting understand what people are planning to build and how they understand the tools we're building, but also B, how they plan to use it and which types of application use cases they have in mind. Because we can sit here back in Austria and think about nice use cases people might want to build, but then actually the market demands decides what is being used and what is being built. And so super interested to get into those conversations. We also now launched, as said before, the .co proof network for proof delegation with Circum and Grove 16. We're now adding NOAA support with the UltraHunk backend to it. So I think that hopefully it's exciting for some developers out there to use the .co proof network for also based on NOAA. And we're also working on more tight integration on the AdStack network. So also trying to evolve our tooling to also support the Brettenberg backend. That's kind of the invite I want to say to people to just engage with our tools.
Yeah, like following this, like really excited about what we will do with AdStack, which like we can talk about more in detail in the next few weeks. And beyond that, like we have like closed our seed fund routing like 2 weeks ago, and this really enables us to grow the team, and the team will grow like rather like in a very short time. We can like onboard a few people, and what's most interesting is that we will have the capability to do a lot more about like developer education. So far we were kind of like really sprinting to get the features, to get the performance of the tooling, and couldn't like didn't have the resources really to invest a lot in developer education. And we think that this will like create or will make the tooling and the properties that we all love about like ZK and MPC much more accessible to developers.
Yeah, first, congratulations on the recent raise, and very excited as well for the upcoming work that you're doing with Aztec. And also really great to hear that you're working on the developer education side as well, and how keen you guys are with trying to really make the developer experience as seamless as possible, whether users are interacting with the private proof network, or even developing with coSNARK and coNoir. I think that, and then even just addressing like how there's no additional overhead that comes with using MPC and applying it on ZK for certain operations. That all adds to the end user experience. So really appreciate how mindful that the team is with that aspect. And I think that in being able to hone in on that aspect, we can really drive ourselves more towards greater adoption. So thank you both for coming in today. I really enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to seeing what the TACEO comes up with next.
Thanks for having us.